Welcome back to Celtic State of Mind. It's Thursday afternoon. I am delighted, as always, to be joined by John Paul Mason. And JP, we were in Glasgow yesterday filming the latest episode of This is a Celtic State of Mind. Episode 10 will be with you on Friday night. I really enjoyed it. Now, we are hearing that after much delays and much patience, Paulo Bernardo is going to be announced today as a Celtic player. It's about time, JP. It's about time, isn't it? 3 days to go until Kelly, the flag day, the opener, and we're announcing a player who was part of the squad last season. Interestingly enough, it wouldn't make my starting 11 right now, but it would be good to get him in the door, JP.
Yeah, it certainly would. And just before we go any further, speaking of Kilmarnock, I'd like to offer an unreserved apology to Kilmarnock Football Club, their support. In particular, my friend Adam Heyman, who lives in New Zealand, who sometimes watches this show despite being of the Kilmarnock persuasion. I made the heinous error last week of thinking that Kilmarnock were playing a pre-season friendly against Cercle Bruges, when in actual fact it was a Europa League qualifying match, which ended 1-1. They play in Belgium tonight. Good luck to them and to St Mirren in their Conference League qualifier. So I just wanted to get that out of the way.
Because if you make a mistake, you will be pulled over the hot coals. Just during the week there, I was responding to some messages that people were saying you've got to be more in depth with your research into transfers. And I had to explain yesterday that we've done a lot of legwork with regards to agents and chief operating officers and football directors of football at football clubs. And so on, and scouts as well, and people who actually work for Celtic, who shall remain nameless for obvious reasons, so that we can speak with some kind of confidence as to how a football department works when it comes to recruitment and how Celtic work when it comes to recruitment. So when we're talking about these things, we don't necessarily say somebody X, Y, or Z told me this, JP, because it doesn't work that way. If you want to continue to get good information from individuals, you can't really call them out on a Celtic State of Mind because they'll probably stop answering their phones. So, we have been talking about recruitment. It's not just the case they sack the boards on a Celtic State of Mind. It's a much bigger issue than that. And I think that the wider issue we've got at the moment, and the reason that things are taking so long, JP, is we don't have the recruitment team in place. We don't have that structure in place. And I'm hoping that Brendan Rodgers' first transfer window was basically ran by Mark Lowell and Joe Dudgeon. The second one, he ran it himself. And it looks as though the third one has gone down the same tracks. But that can't continue. Between now and January, you would hope that a head of recruitment was in place and the structure was in place so that we could really start doing this like a big team. Because we're a big club, but we're not really operating, with regards to recruitment like a big club, aren't we? I used the word yesterday. The word that was used to me by one of the agents that I spoke to was that Celtic are antiquated in their approach to buying players. We need to sort that out, don't we?
Definitely. I mean, if the Paulo Bernardo transfer if he's the poster boy for our recruitment strategy, then it's a pretty it's got a lot of holes in it, you would think, given that how long it's taken. I mean, why on earth would this transfer take as long as it's taken? It seems to be like on a daily basis throughout the last sort of 2 months. It's been the case that he's going to sign, and then 3 days out from the league starting, we're going to sign a guy who could have been on a pre-season tour. Not that he needs to bond with the team, but it would have been good for him personally, for his fitness and everything else, to get him up to speed. I mean, we don't know what Paulo Bernardo's been doing for the last 2 months in terms of his fitness. Has he been on a pre-season tour with Benfica? Has he done anything like that? We don't know. So that's the thing. It's like everybody knows what the Celtic squad has done for the last 2.5, 3 weeks, but we don't know what he's done. So he could be a good bit off it in terms of fitness and everything else. And just say, God forbid, there was an injury, would he be able to step in, next Sunday against Hibs? Or do you know what I mean? Like, he's got to be primed and ready to step in, and he might not be because of our dilly-dallying, shilly-shallying in the transfer market.
This is the thing. IH Decorating, who has been commenting since The deep dark days of COVID. Welcome back to the show. Flogging a dead horse with the Bernardo story. Is he travelling to Scotland on a glacier? Apparently he's at Celtic Park as we speak. Now, Celtic invited us to Kasper Schmeichel's press conference today. So Acsom will be represented by Josh Murphy. We'll have the video up on the channel and on the audio platforms as soon as we get it as well. But yes, the word is that Paulo's actually made his way on a glacier to Celtic Park. He's decorating, and he is going to be unveiled today. Where's the stream, Bradley? 8U. We start at 12:30 every day. I know you came in a wee bit early, but 12:30 on the weekdays. We've also got Joe Hamilton coming in to say, "In Brendan, we must trust." You know what? There's a lot to be said there. We have to trust in Brendan because he's kind of running the show himself, JP. And you know, at the risk of completely, constantly repeating myself, when it comes to the recruitment, he should have a list of players in every department, you know, at his fingertips whenever he needs to call upon. All right, we've got an issue at centre forward. Give me the top 5, and the recruitment team will already know the criteria. And I remember, you know, one of the people up at Lennoxtown found a recruitment document in a bin. Remember that? And they fished it out, took a photograph of it, and of course, within seconds, it was all over the internet. Probably via WhatsApp and all the rest of it. It's an interesting one because it was a recruitment meeting, wasn't it? And you could see who was at that meeting. It was Peter Lawwell, Neil Lennon, some of the scouting team. They were all there, and you know, it showed you how, you know, the ins and outs were being discussed at this meeting. What it didn't show you is how we arrived at the names that were on that sheet of paper or that couple of sheets of paper, and some of the names, obviously, that we see coming back time and time again. JP, we may or may not be in the mix for, but it's interesting. Here's one for you, right? Because we'll get on to Adam Ida. Bernardo and Ida have been the two most discussed players on Acsom this pre-season. I was just checking out Dara O'Shea. You know, he signed for Burnley for about 7 million or something like that. And he has been linked to Celtic. Looking at his attributes, he looks like a good fit at centre-half. Shares an agent with Adam Ida. And this is the thing, that you can link players to other players that were linked with through agents. Now, if it works, brilliant. You know, you might have a network, JP, that really works for you. Like in your industry, you know somebody that knows somebody, and you can join the dots and you can make something work. But you can't put all your eggs in that basket, can you?
Well, no. And that is how it works in music, where agents will have a big band who are worth a headline slot, and then they'll have a small band that are just starting out, and in order to get that small band a gig at the festival, they'll get the headline slot sealed, and then they'll be like, right, you've got Coldplay or whoever, I want you to take this band as well. So that definitely works like that in football, where agents have got players that are like up and coming or whatever, and they'll be like, well, if you do me this deal, I'll give you this player, rather than him going to X other club. So it definitely does work like that. But the Bernardo thing, is the excitement has kind of been taken out of the Bernardo signing. As a fan, you always want a new player. But this Bernardo signing has seemingly been a done deal for so long, and everyone's kind of been like, oh well, we're almost certainly going to get Bernardo. So that when it actually does arrive and does get paraded today and all the rest of it, it's kind of like, well, everyone's already moved on to where's the next one? Where's the next signing?
Who's going to be standing outside waiting? Is it going to be? It's not going to be a Robbie Keane moment, is it? Because you're right, we've just taken so long that the surprise reactionary element to it is non-existent, and it's not us being spoiled. It's just.
And by the way, it's not. That's not what it's all about. Of course, we understand that getting a player, regardless of when we get him, is obviously a great thing, and if he goes on to be successful for Celtic this season and the season after and whatever, then nobody will really care about the protracted saga of his actual signing. But I mean, I'm still a wee guy at heart, and I still want, a bit of excitement when it comes to signings. And right now, Celtic are taking a lot of fun out of that by the fact that they haven't made any really, apart from Kasper Schmeichel, which I'm very happy about and was happy about before he put on a pair of gloves for Celtic, just again from the way that he's impacted in terms of his approaching the media and everything else, and what he's had to say about signing for Celtic. So not at all unhappy about that, but you do want a bit more. And I really, really hope that there is a bit more, or a lot more, between now and the end of this month because we're now in August.
We want a bit more, JP, again, not because we're spoiled, right? But because we watched the team every kick of the ball last season and we weren't great. And yes, we won the double. And yes, we got pulled into that dogfight for the title. But we weren't great for large parts of last season. And I'm not just talking about the obvious ones. There were games where you're watching it, JP, and you're thinking, we're really, really lacking at the back. We're really lacking on the wings. Kyogo wasn't as prolific as a result of that. Hatate was in and out due to injury. There was so many issues last season that we're not just sitting here demanding more. Give me another one. Instant gratification, demanding signings, JP. We're doing it because we know we need it to improve. We can't stand still. And if we bring in Schmeichel as a replacement for Hart, Bernardo and Ida, right, that's the starting point. That's the starting point. Then we need to start building. Because at the moment, we are still 2 players down, outfield players down in Ida and Bernardo. I want to talk a wee bit about Schmeichel because it wasn't too long ago. His old fella was on the overlap talking about Kasper coming back to the EPL after the Euros. And we haven't heard specifically what the interest was or what his options were when Celtic signed him. But it does look as though, obviously, the sway of Brendan Rodgers, who then, you and I think you don't have to sell the Celtic experience, but he's talked about a Celtic experience that he speaks to guys like Schmeichel to entice them to come to Celtic. It's not just one of these ones where he's a free agent and we've picked him up for now and all this kind of stuff. I get the impression he was sought after. He had other options, JP, and it's been something of a coup, as was, for me, Joe Hart, but it's a slightly different scenario because he wasn't playing. Hart's international career had been over for a long time. He played 10 games of football this season before we bought him. He was out of favour. He was almost out of grass. He had a point to prove. Michael's completely different. He's played consistently. He's just played in the Euros for Denmark. And like everybody else, I've watched him with interest on the American tour. And by the way, we always caveat this by going on about pre-season friendlies, etc., etc. I've got a slightly different take about it. I think the first couple of pre-season friendlies you play, particularly if they're at home, on home soil, that is, against Ayr United in Queen's Park, you can't read too much into that. But once you get down to it and you play a few games over in America and you are playing higher caliber opposition, JP, I think your fitness, your sharpness, the confidence, the momentum can all play a part in these games. Yeah, I'd certainly not be very happy if I was sitting here with 2 defeats because I want Celtic to win every game. It wouldn't be a disaster. We've seen pre-seasons that haven't gone well, but the season's gone well. But I do believe that you can gather a bit of confidence and momentum in these games. And I think a big part of that was the fact that Schmeichel was so commanding at the back. I was so impressed with him. I mean, he was a lot of the balls he was playing out. If you'd seen there's how you get the heat map now. There's now a graph whereby it shows you the passes from one player to the next. He was missing out the defence a lot, wasn't he? Going right to the midfield, going out to the wingers. And then the transition from defence to attack was happening a lot quicker. How impressed were you with Schmeichel over the last couple of games?
Massively, and I think somebody made reference to the fact that they could hear his kind of vocal shouts at the back, and whether it was positive or negative. I just think that, I think I spoke about that before, which is such a big thing where you've got like that, a guy that's able to organise a back four and not sort of have a kind of mountain to climb straight away in terms of adjusting to playing in our league, our team. He just straight away, he's got that kind of presence that he'll, and people as well, the defenders as well, it's not like they're going to look back and go, oh, I'm not listening to that guy. It's kind of the same way as like Brendan Rodgers. You're not going to not listen to Brendan Rodgers given what he's done in the game. And if you've got people like, the more people like that, the better. So I am definitely really, really happy that we managed to get someone in like that. And then talking about selling the Celtic experience, you only need to look at the Joe Hart farewell video to see what you can do at a club like this to make a fan base fall for you. And the fan base, including me, definitely that fell for Joe Hart in a big way. To the point that I was like stoically sticking up for him when he was getting abused at the end of the first half of last season, when people were saying, he's done, he needs to go and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, I that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a team that's not functioning in the right way. I'm not looking at Joe Hart as being some sort of weak link. So
he was even getting stick. I mean, this is the thing, because we won the double. You're on the high of winning the double, and we've done it with a bit of style, right? But think back to the 2-1 game at Celtic Park, and Tavernier scores a free kick, and it was in the top left-hand corner. And the stick that Joe Hart got on the socials, and a lot of the comments that were coming through in our post-match regarding Joe Hart, he's finished, he's this, he's that, we'll never win nothing with Joe Hart. And it's interesting how the kind of perception changes very, very quickly, JP, over a period of a few months. But the sense I got with that team last season, because let's be honest about it, Bernardo wasn't a first pick. He started on the bench in the Scottish Cup final. Either wasn't a first pick. There were certain games, like the Kilmarnock game, he was perfect for that, but he didn't start the Scottish Cup final. I felt that the team we were watching was actually Ange Postecoglou's team coming to the end of its cycle. And Brendan Rodgers was able to get a tune out of some guys that probably I didn't expect, like James Forrest being the best example of that. The way that James Forrest came into the team quite late on in the season and played a massive part. But I did feel as though it was Ange's team that Brendan was playing. I mean, the 11 that started the Scottish Cup final were all Ange's players, right? And it felt as though we've come to the end of that cycle. So there was a massive refresh, not a rebuild as such, but a refresh required in the summer. And Brendan Rodgers spoken about how Schmeichel has given everybody in the place a lift. Now, just bringing in new faces and a new dynamic into the dressing room and onto the training pitch is huge. But I just feel, and I'm not saying that Brendan's talking in code, he's no blinking messages to us and all that stuff, but there's certain things I'm picking up that he's saying. Schmeichel's made a massive difference by coming in. We need more of that. Now, if Bernardo and Ida comes in, obviously they're part of the team anyway, and popular. Well, as far as Ida's concerned in the WhatsApp group, he's obviously quite. You don't have to be popular to be in a WhatsApp group. I mean, I'm in a few of them, right? But it's clear that he's part of the team. But to bring someone else in within a different position, etc., to give us that lift, that's huge as well, JP. Because I think a dressing room can get stale, and I did get that sense we were at the end of the cycle. Did you get that feeling as well?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, obviously, Joe Hart announced that he was going in January, so everybody knew that there was going to be a pair of gloves to fill there. And then I guess at that point, whether the team knew that that Schmeichel was maybe on the cards, I don't know. But if they didn't, they would all be kind of looking around, going, "Well, who are they going to get to fill Joe Hart's position?" Because it's such a big. It's a big pair of gloves to fill, and the send off that he got, they did have a job on their hands getting somebody that would be worthy of taking them on. And my worry was that we were going to go out and the keepers we were being linked with were all these guys that I didn't really know much about, but there was fees attached to them, and you are just getting that kind of feeling of like right keeper, wrong film. And that you don't want another scenario like that where it has to be absolutely right. And I know it's kind of short-termism given his age profile and everything else, but I don't think Celtic could afford to get something like this wrong. And if Sinisalo is his understudy and he is kind of looked upon as being potentially a future number one, because how many times have we had a second choice keeper and going, oh well, he'll be the one to take over the gloves, and it's never happened. Really, no. Genuinely, it kind of hasn't really happened, because it's always just been about the number one. The number two has played games here and there, whether it's Scott Bain or whatever, and Siegrist obviously just completely didn't work at all. And there's been so many others as well. That there was the COVID season where we had a number of keepers that didn't ever actually nail it down. And Scott Bain played for a bit of that season as well.
Yeah. Conor Hazard, Vasilis Barkas. It was like there wasn't a first choice between the three of them. You're right. We brought in a goalkeeper this time, and I think that on the back of the mention of Schmeichel's age and the fact that he's here for 2 years, probably no longer than that, bringing in Sinisalo was perfect, because you know that there's a plan there. There's a succession plan when Schmeichel hangs the gloves up, that he's been working with this guy, Sini Salo, who's a much younger goalkeeper, and he can learn loads. He can learn absolutely a huge amount from Schmeichel. I mean, imagine going to your work every day and working with somebody like that, JP, and learning from them. You'd be a sponge. But you mentioned Siegrist. Siegrist is now playing his football under Neil Lennon. Neil Lennon's been in the news in the last couple of days, and I thought it was a bit of furore over nothing. I remember up at Barrowfield, right, George Cadet signed, and everybody remembers the debut and the goal and blowing the airlines off and all that kind of stuff, right, and the celebration. But one of his first training sessions, he's pictured in one of the tabloids having a pee. You know what I mean? I think people are playing up a wee bit too much to Neil Lennon, right, having a slash on a training pitch. I'm not being funny, JP. There's a lot worse happens, I'm sure, on a training pitch and in a dressing room. Is it not a wee bit too much?
Was it the Romanian press that blew it out of proportion, or was it? It was the Romanian press, because obviously it's got headlines in Scotland. So I didn't know if it was something that the Scottish press had just taken and ran with it. But yeah, I mean, it's not something that I would lose sleep over if it happened. I mean, it's not ideal, I don't think, but I don't think it's anything that's so heinous that he deserves to be absolutely lambasted. I think he's got more problems to worry about than that, in terms of just briefly reading about his results on the pitch, and he's saying that the team are a bit mentally wounded from last season and stuff like that. So he's got a job in his hands to get a tune out of this team, I think. And I also just saw that little clip there of him talking about how he'd had a conversation with Hibs and a conversation with Aberdeen. But it never went any further than that. It just was that was just a conversation. So, and he was disappointed he didn't get any English offers. But then he didn't really do anything in England with Bolton that would sort of make him pop up on teams' radars down there, I don't think. So I feel for him a bit, because like, he's clearly got something. Like he as much as people want to slag him for the last season at Celtic, I mean, he did really well with Celtic at times. Like, we beat Lazio home and away. That wasn't an accident. That was his team that did that.
People might, by the way, I'm just going to say this, JP, that over the last wee while, because I think we've increased with the content on the channel, we've increased obviously with the new show on a Friday night, etc. There's been a lot of new people coming on, so welcome to every single one of you. We appreciate everybody that's tuning into a Celtic State of Mind. But there's been a few people saying, why are you talking about that? That happens when we're on a Celtic State of Mind. We will talk about everything, for the first kick of the ball in 1888 right up to now, and every nuance in between. But yeah, we will always come back to the day-to-day topics, because it is like a news bulletin, the Acsom bulletin. But for a moment, JP and I are digressing to talk a wee bit about Neil Lennon, former player and manager. And I think it is relevant because when he got his job in England, like you said, right, he was at the absolute peak of his powers. Celtic had reached the last 16 of the Champions League. You'll remember the Juventus game. Remember the way that they were putting their hands around Gary Hooper and all that at corners. Remember how they did that?
Yeah.
They beat us 5-0. It's the last time Celtic got to the last 16. But what I would say to you is, I've had an opportunity to speak to many of the players during his second tenure, JP. But see the players that I've spoken to during his first time at Celtic, when he was the manager, they love him.
Joe Ledley.
They adore him, JP. Joe Ledley, Charlie Mulgrew, all these guys, right, absolutely love Neil Lennon. So they'll concede that tactically he's not one of these mastermind coaches that tactically would be able to outfox another manager or another team. I mean, he done no bad against Barcelona right enough. But in terms of the man management, every one of them swears by Lenny. I think that it's a tired, old, lazy way of reporting about Neil Lennon as if he's just a shambles. Oh, look at him peeing on the pitch now and all this kind of stuff. Give him a break. He's done well at every team he's been at, except for Bolton. But Bolton was a basket case of a club, and he probably should have done his due diligence there, him and Big Johan. Johan loves him as well. They all do. Everybody I've spoken to, they all love the guy.
How was the night in Grangemouth last Saturday?
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. It was surreal, JP, right? And you have moments like this in your workplace. It was surreal. I'm sitting in a boozer in Grangemouth. The Celtic game's on the TV live, and I'm sitting with Charlie Mulgrew and Joe Ledley talking about it. How surreal is that? It's just crazy. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. Anyone who never picked up on it, Joe Ledley's story about leaving Celtic was so emotionally delivered. Honestly, he was very emotional talking about it. JP, he was forced out the football club for £500,000. Shocking. And at the time, he's still in the prime. He went and played 3.5 years in the Premiership for Crystal Palace. He was part of the Wales squad that got to the semi-finals of the Euros in 2016. Yet we punted him for £500,000. He was up on the stage doing the dance, JP. You know that dance that became a viral dance? He was doing all that. He had the crowd singing Joe, Joe, Super Joe. He says, I was the original Joe. Joe Hart's nicked my song. I didn't have the heart to tell him that actually Joe Miller was the original Joe. Brilliant nights. And
speaking of that Chelsea game, I didn't see it live. I was in Edinburgh on Saturday night, but I've watched some of the content back, and there's a particular YouTube clip where it's the Chelsea TV commentary. I would encourage anybody to go and seek that out, because it's just a moment of deflation followed by 3 more moments of deflation. And there was another guy who does he was doing a vlog going to all the Chelsea games, pre-season games in the States. Fairly actually likeable guy, but he was going round all the Chelsea fans in America, in Indiana before the game, and they were all like, yeah, 3-0, 3-0, yeah, 4-0 and all this sort of stuff. And you're like, it's great, like knowing what's coming, and then he's obviously sitting in the stand just absolutely appalled at what he's seeing. And it's quite mad as well. Enzo Maresca, manager, could have been the Celtic manager.
I know. And there's a few in the Acsom team who wanted him. I think Brian Degnan was a fan of Enzo Maresca, maybe Kevin Graham. I think Enzo Maresca was his second choice after Jack Ross. I'll need to check that. Right, let's get some comments coming through. Stephen Sloan, great to see you. Hope you're well, pal. If roles were reversed tomorrow with Celtic and Rangers and they had our money, they would leave us for dust for many, many years. But our board don't have their killer instinct. There's a lot happening that we don't know about over at Ibrox or Hampden or wherever they're based these days, JP. And this pre-season, we've not really been focusing on that. But to be honest with you, on a Celtic State of Mind, we don't. Unless we're playing Rangers, we don't tend to focus on them. But in relation to that comment, I'm not sure if there is a way of Celtic being over cautious when it comes to the state of Rangers, the state of our rivals. Is that a concern for you? Because it comes through on our comments on a regular basis, JP.
Well, it's interesting that you used the word dust, because that's exactly what they became, isn't it? So I don't know. I'm not subscribing to the fact that if the roles were reversed, they would just go and hose money on players and be signing wingers from Plymouth Argyle for 10 million and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know if that is what they would do if they did have their money. Yes, it's frustrating for me that we aren't spending seemingly any money at the moment, because I don't think Bernardo is going to end up costing what we maybe thought at one point. He was maybe going to be like 6 million or something like that. I guess maybe it'll be an undisclosed fee, that usual chestnut. But I would rather that we spent properly but not overspend, and not get done by teams like that. The Ida deal, I don't know if that is Norwich dragging their heels and wanting an extra couple of million or whatever. But I mean, I've seen if it was a difference between 4 million or 6 million for Adam Ida, we've seen Adam Ida for 6 months in a Celtic jersey. And I think you and I and most Celtic fans would be like, well, if it was a case that you're getting him, but you're only getting him for 6 million, not 4, I'd pay the 6. Mm-hmm. Because based on what I've seen us spend 6 million on before, either collectively on players or on one player or whatever, you could throw three £2 million players together and we've maybe not got a bean back for them, and they've not contributed anything. So I've seen what Adam Ida can do in a Celtic jersey. I would be excited to see what he could do again in a Celtic jersey as a permanent member of the squad, and with the carrot of Champions League football and the ability to play, much like Matt O'Reilly playing for MK Dons, and then a year later he's in the Bernabeu. Things like that, where you really get that opportunity to push yourself and test yourself against the best, really. So with regards to the spending the money, I am very aware that we're never going to be that club that hoses money on players and puts herself into financial peril. And I never want us to do that. But at the same time, there's got to be a happy medium. You've got to, surely, if we want to improve and if we want to get over that hurdle of progressing in Europe, which Brendan Rodgers has mentioned very recently again in his press interviews, he's spoken about really looking to make a mark in Europe. And you see that what we've done in pre-season, and I know it's pre-season, but it shows that we're kind of like more than halfway there with this side. And you just think if we could get that 2 or 3 players additional, it would really, really push us on. And we've spoken about that before.
Yeah. Well, the big thing now that I gauge, JP, and by the way, I'm looking at the situation that we're in right now, how we got to the situation where if a player, and it could be Adam Ida, it could be anybody, and we're quoted £8 million, it's almost as if we have been conditioned into gasping at that price. And what we need to do is realise that not only is it not a massive amount of money in modern football in the top divisions or for teams who want to compete in the Champions League, let's just say, it shouldn't really be something that we're gasping at anyway, JP, because of the structure that we have financially at the football club. We can't afford to go out and bring in players who are going to cost you that level of transfer fee. The issue I've got now when I look at the squad is how bloated it is. And I can understand any business looking at that, who are in any industry saying, right, we need more of that particular commodity, let's just say, right, in any business. We've already got loads of them, but they're not great. Well, we need to get rid of a lot of them first. And we're not quite there. And people might say, but we've got the money. We need to manage a squad. And that's been over a number of different transfer windows. When you're talking about guys like Bernabe still being a Celtic player, how many transfer windows ago did we sign him? And James McCarthy gets mentioned all the time. And we've just moved on Siegrist. 2 years he was at the football club. He played 2 games. We've got a bloated squad. And not only is it blocking the development of some of the young guys, I think it's also blocking the incoming of new players. We are desperate for another striker. Absolutely desperate. All it takes is for Kyogo to stub his toe at training. And we're really, really struggling. We're desperate for a left back, and we have been for ages. But it's due to a lot of it is legacy issues. Brendan Rodgers has inherited a lot of these problems, JP, and it might take quite a few transfer windows before he can put them right. So there's an element of sympathy for Rodgers. I know he's well paid, and he's the highest paid manager at a football club in the history of the club and all the rest of it. But he has inherited some of these issues, and it's going to take a while to sort it out. I'm looking at some of the comments. I'm really, really keen. Rob Lilly, that's a dangerous comment to make. JP and I could just talk for the rest of this show about music. And obviously, George Robertson is admiring your impression, PJD and Danny Dyer. JP does do a few good impressions. They come and go. That's how they went bust, says opinionated Glaswegian OG. Yeah, but spending money they didn't have. I think the point was if they were so cash rich as Celtic are now, having managed the finances over a couple of decades, that's why we are where we are. They would work differently, and I think they would work differently. I've said it before. I do think we're a bit overcautious, JP. Going into last season's Champions League, I thought we had half a dozen players I was happy with at that level. Going into this Champions League, that number's not really changed. Some people have said, listen, Johnston can hold his own at that level, or Maeda can hold his own at that level. All right, okay, let's say that they can. That takes us up to 8. So what you then need is another 3 people at that level, plus another few backups at that level. So you're always 4 or 5 short, JP. And I remember doing a show with Colin Watt, good pal of mine, Colin. You'll remember him from the Celtic State of Mind. And we were in Stirling. We actually had a guest lined up, and we used to pay for a recording studio in Stirling, audio only. They would come in, they would do an hour, and then we would have 4 guests a month, and we would put them out. And something happened with the guest car. They couldn't make it. So Colin and I basically just chewed the fat about the best 11 players that we'd had during what was then 7 in a row, I think, maybe 6 in a row. And it was astonishing how good a team you could assemble over a period of 4, 5, 6 years. And I just feel that we're at that stage where the cycle has to almost be flawless, so that when Matt O'Reilly comes to the point where he leaves the club, JP, we've got enough quality in the squad rather than scrambling about to try and replace him. Because if he leaves, then for me, we're regressing in terms of the quality going into the Champions League. Some interesting comments Brendan Rodgers been making about Matt O'Reilly, and this will come as no surprise to you, JP. He's got no concerns about his approach with regards to all the different clubs that are interested. And at the moment, we know about Atletico Madrid, Galatasaray at the beginning of the year. You can add on to that list Southampton, Roma, Juventus and Atalanta, all interested in him. No wonder. The guy's class. Brendan Rodgers said he's such a great professional. So he's got no concerns about the old down and tools. So we'll come to Adam Ida's situation in a minute. And then he talks about the bids and how the bids have obviously been absolutely lowballing Celtic's valuation of the player. And Brendan said they sometimes can place their value on the league and not the player. I think that's a sensible comment. He moves on to say this, though, and I like this, right? Because I think it's a message to any club who's interested in our player, JP, but I also think it's a message to our boards, the money men. No player will leave here unless it's for the right valuation. And at this moment in time, there's been no team that's been anywhere near that. So I think that's quite bold by Brendan. It's a message to any club interested in O'Reilly. I think it's also a message to the board, JP. Do not sell this player from under my nose.
It is interesting that of all the people that the value of Matt O'Reilly could be placed upon, it is interesting that of all the people, it's actually happened to a player that I would say is completely unique in terms of his outlook on life and all the rest of it. I think there's been many instances in the past of players who've had a big value put in their head, and then it's a case of, right, get me out here ASAP. Edward, Ryan Christie, maybe Christopher Ayer, where they immediately just go, right, my time here is done and get me out as soon as possible. And then obviously the global pandemic happens and that doesn't allow them to get their moves at the time that they possibly could have and should have done. But I think as Anthony Joseph reported a couple of days ago, I don't know if this is direct from the player or anyone close to the player, but he is happy at Celtic. And Brendan Rodgers has also made the point of saying to leave Celtic is quite a big wrench. And I think it would be for Matt O'Reilly, regardless of the figure on the table, because you can tell he enjoys the club, enjoys the challenges. Yes, it's a bit monotonous, the Scottish League and everything else, and maybe it's not as attractive as playing in Spain or Germany or even England, but there's enough about Celtic that it could keep Matt O'Reilly happy, where that club that Brendan Rodgers refers to not come in with the sizable bid in this transfer window. You're not going to be left with a spoiled child kicking his heels or whatever, not willing to give you 100%. He would probably burst a gut to give you even more than that if that's possible. I know it's not really. You can only give 100%, but that's how I see it as well. So it's just a case of the waiting game now, and everybody is obviously on edge as to whether or not that club out there will come out with a £25 million bid and meet. I mean, I think who is it that's just gone for Conor Gallagher? Atletico Madrid, 34 million.
Yeah.
I don't really know much about Conor Gallagher, or don't know how well he's rated within the game, but I mean, if he's going for 34 million, is that because he's a Chelsea player, because he plays in the English Premier League? Is there a tax that you have to add on? Just like Brendan Rodgers said, you're buying from that league, so immediately there's an additional amount of money you could add on, and that's what these clubs are doing. They're subtracting from his value, from his actual value, because of the league that he plays in. But I think anybody that's watched Celtic or any football team, if you support a football team and you see a player, you know immediately if that player can do it at a higher level. And we've seen it with guys like Van Dijk and past, Wanyama, Forster, guys that you know are capable of playing at that top level. I mean, even guys like Stuart Armstrong, he's had a really good career in England. Yeah. Fair enough, he's not set the world on fire, but he's a fairly consistent member of that Southampton squad, and more than sort of cemented his place in their fans' sort of hearts and minds. I think they'll always think of Stuart Armstrong fondly, given what he's delivered for them. So you do get that feeling and know if a player can cut it at that level, and there's absolutely no doubt Matt O'Reilly can play at a very high level, and will hopefully push his way into the Denmark side now that the sort of archaic management structure has gone out there as well, who were clearly picking the old guard and people that they tried and tested and weren't willing to sort of hang their hat on new blood. And when almost the entire Danish nation were kind of like screaming out, going, "Why have you not picked Matt Riley?" Because they could see from what they've seen with Celtic, they could see like guys playing in the Champions League. He's really, really high rated. He's a good guy as well to have about, I'm sure, in the Danish camp. So, it's a nervy one, because obviously every day you're just looking up Celtic news and expecting, it's going to be today. The selfish part of me just wants to see him play for maybe one more year or 6 more months, including the Champions League. And then if that's the case, then so be it. But it's just because you don't get these opportunities to see players like this that often. They come around and they're rare. They're diamonds, aren't they? They're just
Absolutely, JP, and that's the frustration that I feel. And when I was talking about managing to keep the quality for a wee bit longer, because there's more quality to come, and then they're all combined within the same team, and then you can make progress in Europe.
And you feel we can be developed under Brendan Rodgers as well. It's not as if he's with a manager that can't make him improve his game. I'd say probably already has, and I'm pretty sure if you sat Matt O'Reilly down, he would admit that, because somebody brought out the best in Matt O'Reilly last year, and it was, what is it, a coincidence that it was Brendan Rodgers that was there, that he had his best season probably ever in terms of goals and assists. And
absolutely, by a distance, by a huge distance, actually. And see, the thing as well, JP, we've not seen that trajectory of improvement in Rio Hatate, and he's got it in his locker to improve vastly. And I know that it was injury problems last season. Let's not forget the impact Hatate made when he came into the Celtic side. And I'm just thinking, imagine for a campaign seeing the two of them absolutely at the top of their game. There was a moment against Chelsea. I obviously watched it back, because watching it in a boozer, when you're talking to Joe Ledley and Charlie Mulgrew, you're not really seeing that much. You can follow the game and all the rest of it. So I watched it again on Monday morning before doing the bulletin, and you could see the shape. You really could see the shape. It was almost as if they were moving together. So you had Hatate and O'Reilly were, in terms of where they were on the park, they were far more attacking. Let's say 15 yards ahead of McGregor, who was dead centre of them. So there was that diamond. And you're just thinking to yourself, you know what McGregor's going to give you. Yeah, he's getting a wee bit older. So maybe in terms of his attacking play, he's regressing a wee bit. So he sits back, he's more a defensive player. And you've got O'Reilly and Hatate. And some of the stuff Hatate was doing took me back to those early games, those early months where he was fearless. He was, playing balls through the eye of a needle, JP, the risky pass that can open up a defence, open up a tight defence. And this is the big thing a lot of people have been saying. It's back to business at the weekend. We're back to playing against really tight defences. It's maybe going to be harder for Hatate to have that type of game, or for Kuhn to find that kind of space, because he was brilliant against Man City. Is that a concern for you? Because there was a lot of games like that last season, JP. And I think that having somebody like Hatate on form can completely change that. Having somebody like Schmeichel at the back who can turn the defence into attack a lot quicker and put them on the back foot, something as small as that can completely unlock a defence.
Well, if you can compare and contrast the Rio Hatate that's starting this season with last season, it's kind of a world away, because he'd been plagued with injury, and did he not? He was David Turnbull was favoured over Rio Hatate
against Ross County.
Yeah. So you've got a guy who's been in form, who's been linked with English Premier League moves. Again, it might be selfish, but the smart person within Rio Hatate camp would be, right, if you're feeling like you're going to be kicking into gear at the start of the season, you've got Champions League games, you've never really performed at Champions League level and excelled. Everyone will point to that over-the-shoulder volley pass against Real Madrid, but you can't dine out on that forever. I'm talking about a game where it's the Rio Hatate game and everyone talks about that game and be like, I remember that game when he played in Europe against, whoever, and got man of the match or whatever, because he's not really had that type of game. Matt O'Reilly has against Atletico Madrid, and he's got the trophy to prove it. But maybe if Rio Hatate really wants to get the type of move that he maybe does want to get, because from what I heard, he did want to go last summer, and nobody came in for him. If he does want to get that move, playing and starring in the Champions League in this clutch of games coming up, that could be the thing that is the difference from him moving to a lower league English Premier League club or a mid to top or elsewhere. It doesn't need to be necessarily England. I'm sure he would quite happily move to Spain or Germany or whatever. I don't know if he's got his sights set specifically on England, but he's not really done enough, I don't think, consistently at that high level to really be sort of swimming in the same pool as Matt O'Reilly, if you know what I mean, because he's to me, he hasn't anyway. I know he's obviously a very, very good player, and I don't want to see him leave because, like you say, he does really dovetail well with those three. I mean, anybody just when rhyming off a Celtic midfield will go Hatate, O'Reilly, McGregor. That's what you want the midfield to be if everyone's fit, which leaves it difficult for Bernardo to get in there. But Bernardo has obviously proved that he can be a reliable substitute or starter if one of them needs a rest or isn't fit or whatever.
I just think it's all about having that depth, in your squad. We've seen the injury issues over the last couple of seasons that Carl McGregor's had, and also Hatate. So you need that fourth midfielder. I don't see him as a replacement for either of the two players that have had interest, because apparently there has been some in Hatate. I don't know if that's just paper talk, but I want to keep all three midfielders as they are, and have Bernardo is really just solidifying that, JP, and giving you different options. And I think that, all over the park, if you've got that, then we can go into the Champions League with a wee bit more confidence. Where am I unhappy? It's the obvious ones. Probably the same as everybody else in the comment section. Centre half, left back. We need to get the reinforcements in. And I've said this before a few times as well. The plan was to get McKenna and Tierney in. That was the plan. And that all went belly up, as it were, with regards to wage demands and injuries. If that had happened directly after the Euros, followed up with the two goalies, followed up with the two loanees, we're going into Kilmarnock probably feeling all right, to be honest, JP, about the business that we've done. And I'll go back to Brendan Rodgers' comments about we could have had 9 players in on day one, because there's always that thing whereby people come in the comments and say, how could we get deals done when Ange was in charge? Liam Devine comes in. It's a good point, right? So why was Ange so good at getting people to get deals done? Because he put pressure on people. He put pressure on people at every level. That was his genius. Fans must pressure the board. Ange Postecoglou come in, and he had that link to the biggest agency in the world, and it was Frank Trimboli, wasn't it, at CAA base? And we done wonders. And a lot of the guys that were signing, if they weren't on that agency, they were contacts of Frank Trimboli, and it was like the guys just went to work on it, JP. So it's not like he's walked into Celtic and he's tapped into a brilliant recruitment strategy. It was down to Ange and the guy he knew and the agency and the network that he had, and that's why we got so many good signings. Once the regime changed to a degree, and we all know Mark Lawwell became the head of recruitment, Joe Dudgeon was the head of scouting, the players we started bringing in were nowhere near that level. And I was talking yesterday again, JP, about a player getting offered to Celtic and Rangers. Well, of course they are. So if a player's available, the agent will offer them to the 2 clubs in Scotland that might be able to afford them, plus the top however many clubs in England and so on. So a lot of the players that Rangers have signed over the last X amount of years have been offered to us both. And the same can be said with Celtic. And the example I gave was Palmer. So you could be really lazy and complacent and just sit back and just wait for the agents to come to you and say, well, if Rangers want them, we could pump financially, or they'll end up overpaying for them or giving them too much wages, and it'll be a bad move for them. So Celtic are in control in that scenario, but it's not a good scenario to be in. It needs to be far more specific. So when you look at the transfer windows prior to the January one just there, we've signed a raft of players, JP, a raft of players. And we're not doing it anymore because we're being very specific about the players that come into the building. So it's a hard balance because on the one hand, if you just say, like, show patience, people lose their minds and call you a cheerleader and all the rest of it. But I'd much rather, the process was a wee bit slower, JP, but the players that came in were all going to contribute to the starting 11.
Aye, totally. I don't want to end up with, a bunch of guys in the periphery that are not going to do anything, i.e. Home, Yang, Kwon. These guys, I mean, what realistically are those three players going to play this season if they stay at Celtic? How many minutes? Let's put it in this broadcast right now so that we can remember and go back to it and say, right, what will Kwon play this season? What will Yang play this season? Or what will Home play this season?
Right. Well, all three of them are on my list, and I would actually, if I got an offer for Kwon, if somebody wanted to pay the £1 million back, I'd take it, right? But I reckon in terms of development, JP, I would put him out on loan. So I'm going to say he's going to play no minutes for Celtic, none. Home, I've still got hope for Home. Has he progressed? Yeah, has he progressed enough in the last year? I'm not sure he has. I don't know what's been going on, but I don't think he's progressed enough. How many games they play last season? I'll check that while I'm talking. And the big question will be, will he play more? Because I had put Home and Lowell in a kind of the same bracket because they had been name-checked, hadn't they, by Brendan Rodgers. But I think over the pre-season, when people say you can't learn anything in pre-season, Odin Holmes ahead of Boss and Lowell in terms of game time. JP, I don't know if you agree with that. Particularly against the two English clubs, I don't think Lowell showed up that well. Mm-hmm. So Odin Holm, I'm going to have a look to see what he played last season, and I'll base it on that. What did he play last season? And he's not played a lot of football, and particularly in the second half when Brendan Rodgers needed players he could trust to get the job done, he wasn't the kind of go-to guy. So let's have it 23-24. Odin Holm, £2.5 million. He comes in, he's only 20 years of age. He played 13 games, but it was 410 minutes. Is he going to play more than that? I'd loan him out as well. Another one is Yang. I think Yang has had more minutes than the two of them put together. Again, I don't think he showed enough. JP, I think he maybe played 20 games. So I'm going to say between the three players, 20 games. 20 games of football.
And is that really enough? Is that really enough to be contributing to the cause? I don't think it is. But yeah, it's as much as everybody's eager for signings, I definitely don't want the wrong type of signing coming in. You want, I mean, even you look back to the centre half, I wouldn't say it's a debacle, but I mean, it kind of is in terms of we've spent, close to 8 million on two centre halves, who neither of whom are the centre halves for Celtic, in terms of how you would think of them and starting for Celtic. They're not anywhere near that. Nawrocki clearly has fitness issues and is prone to injury. Didn't play a minute of pre-season. Not great, and not a great start for him. I mean, obviously you can't help it if you get injured, but if of all the players that you really wanted to sort of step up, he's one. He would be at the top of the list, really, because you've shelled out 4 million or 4 odd million on him, and he's not been anywhere really near it. And I still don't know if the manager actually wants him or will play him if he is fit. I don't know that. And Lagerbielke is complete mystery as well. And those two guys have got huge question marks over them. Lagerbielke, you would think, would be gone by the end of this month to a team on loan or permanently.
Yeah.
Why would he stay? Unless there's been some mad turnaround in circumstance. But to go from nearly being on a plane to Italy in January to being called back because of an injury crisis or a potential injury crisis, how does that go to being suddenly in the manager's thoughts? He must have had a hell of a pre-season if he has done that. Yeah.
He's still getting linked to several clubs in Serie A. I think it's another one, JP, you would bite their hands off if you got the opportunity. But centre half, you called it debacle. I totally agree with that, right? Because I'm just having a look through the centre halves we've signed over the last few seasons. So in Ange Postecoglou's first season, of course, we bring in Cameron Carter-Vickers on loan, and we brought also Carol Starfelt to the club, right? So you've got two, and it turned out to be a very good partnership. But we know that Starfelt moved on. Apparently, he's easy enough to pick up if we wanted to sign him back. The following season, we bring in Maurice Jens. Remember him? Maurice Jens comes in. Cameron Carter-Vickers joins permanently. So we've got three centre halves in the building over those 2 seasons. And then, of course, last season, we bring in Nat Phillips, Mike Nawrocki, and Gustav Lagerbielke. So 6 centre halves, one of which is Nat Phillips is left as well. 2 of them have already left. And we're still playing Liam Scales. Now, again, it's not a dig at Liam Scales, but going into the Champions League, he's not on my list of players that I think's at that level. People might say he won a man of the match last season. I get it. I think he's been brilliant. He's a great backup. But we need to get the same type of quality as Carter-Vickers if we want to make an impression in Europe. On the Yang thing, just to go back to my rationale behind this, JP, right? On the left-hand side, my first pick's Maeda, and underneath him is Palmer. And I think Palmer's done pretty well in the pre-season. On the right-hand side, my first pick's Kuhn. I said that before the Man City game, by the way. And James Forrest is the backup. So then you've got question marks around what do you do with Yang? What do you do with Mikey Johnson? I would move them on. If I could, I would move them on. With regards to Johnson, I don't want to labour the fact on him. He's an academy graduate. And a lot of people say he gets stick because of that. I was having a look at some of the young players, obviously, that showed up really well on tour. And one guy that wasn't there, of course, was Daniel Kelly, right? So let's just stop for a moment and consider the position he's in, right? So he broke through last season, and I think he impressed us all. He scores his first goal for Celtic against Dundee, came on for the captain. And you're thinking, here's a guy, 18-year-old, he could be the next guy to break through. He's in the last few months of his contract. As you said earlier on, we're on the 1st of August. His contract expires on the 31st of December. And instead of taking him to America to be part of that experience and to learn from the senior players and be on tour with the senior players, it's very important, according to ex-players, to do that kind of thing, JP, and to be accepted into the team and all that stuff. He's been banished to the B team. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how we treat players, right? Because he's 18. It's not like he's a grizzly old footballer. He's had his career and he's had a few falling out with managers over the years and he can take it. This kid's just getting started. I don't think we're treating him that well.
Nah, I mean, you don't know what's going on behind closed doors and conversations that have been had or not had, as the case sometimes is, when players just get the silent treatment and they don't really know what's going on. But I think it's really, as much as I want there to be a pathway to the first team for young Scottish players, it's more difficult than ever. And even with there isn't that spectre of going for 10 in a row, or are we? I don't know. Not quite yet. But there isn't that kind of pressure where it's like, you can only play first team ready players in the Celtic first team. I don't know how you get past that. I don't know. I know it's clearly a question for Celtic to answer as to how they develop players and how they give players opportunities to actually nail a place down and keep it. I think people are frustrated with Mikey Johnson because he's not done what Kieran Tierney did in his position. He's not been that guy that's played week in, week out and contributed to a Scottish Cup win or a league win or whatever, or played well in the Champions League, which is all the things that Kieran Tierney did. And I think Kieran Tierney's made it quite difficult for a lot of players that have come along after him, in that he's the sort of benchmark. And if you don't get anywhere even near that, then you're kind of considered not good enough. And even though Mikey Johnson showed flashes, he's obviously scored those 2 goals last season in Dundee. And he obviously did well at West Brom, but he's not done anything, I don't think, for many Celtic fans. You'd struggle to find a Celtic fan that would say, I want him in the squad for this season, and I think he's going to contribute massively to this season. He's 25 years old. Surely, to God, you'd want to play. I know the Celtic experience is great and everything else, but the Celtic experience is only great if you're actually properly contributing. I would have thought if you're not then it could be quite a lonely place, especially if you get banished to a B team at 18 years old.
Yeah,
that's not a place I'd like to be.
I'm taking myself back to being 18, JP, right, and thinking how that would affect me, right? Because these guys are human beings, and this is a big thing. We're meant to be better at mental health awareness. I mean, that's going to hammer the boy's confidence. I've got no skin in the game. I don't know him. I don't know his family. I'm just looking at a young guy coming through at 18. And I absolutely agree with one of the points that comes through here. Let's be honest. Here we go. Uncle Nobby Steamboat. Let's be honest. It's nearly impossible for the young boys to make it into the first team unless they're exceptional. And we've got a guy here who made that breakthrough last season. And, you know, like many of his teammates, by the time they make the breakthrough, JP, at 18, 19, they've been at the club for 10 years. Right, so they've worked hard, and there's been a massive investment in the club as well as in the player investing in Celtic. And then it happens, and you get that first game for the football club, and you show up well. Then you score your first goal, and you're thinking these are the building blocks to this young man's career. And then because, and let's be honest, the contracts that we're offering these guys, should we be offering them the contract in the last year of his deal? Because at that point, you know, he can go and speak to anybody he wants. So, you know, people often say, oh, you know, they're mercenary, even at that age. I don't think the club's managed this very well. And I don't think we managed the Vata situation that well either. And I've got concerns about some of the other boys that showed up really well, because Paul Bosas mentions it. Anderson and Turley will come into the first team squad. I hope they do. So, Anderson's a wee bit older, 20, and he's had a season in Austria. Turley came in. Kingsley went under the radar a wee bit because the two fullbacks had played so well. I thought Turley was brilliant against Chelsea. He was brave. He had a couple of shots and goals from distance. I really liked what I seen. Again, he's only 18 years old, Celtic mad, and his contract's up in 10 months' time. And I get concerned that, you know, with Kingsley, I'm not saying we mistreat them. I mean, these guys are, you know, they're served hand over foot as young boys, JP, right? They are, let's be honest. At 18, you know, they go in, they get fed, they do a bit of training, they go home. It's a great lifestyle. But the big thing for me is people saying it's difficult to break in. And absolutely, there is no doubt. I still don't think we do enough of it as a football club. I think there's games every single season, particularly once the season's up and running, where you're playing at home against, there's maybe 5 or 6 teams in the league where you could have 2 or 3 of these boys on the bench, JP, and you could give them minutes in the second half. And by the end of the season, you've given them a lot more experience. You know, they get to a point they're not going to learn much in the Lowland League, and they've got to be in and around the first team. Otherwise, why do we have an academy? You know, it's not so that we produce one player every decade to pay for it and then sell them for a big fee, because that doesn't work. We need to start the conveyor belt. But a big part of that is we need to pay, and I don't mean the going rate in terms of English football. We just need to offer them contracts that aren't embarrassing. You know, we've lost Ben Doak, we've lost Rocco Vata.
I mean, he's been linked with a move away for Liverpool already. I say already, but did you see that?
Yeah.
I think it was at Leicester.
Because I think Klopp was a massive influence on the move, and he rated him really highly, but obviously he's moved on. So it's up in the air. And I get why young guys given the chance, JP, sometimes just grasp it with both hands. But the club need to do better. Particularly if we're investing £20 million in that academy up at Barrowfield. We need to do better by the young kids. And if they're in and about, or if they've made their debut, give them a contract and do it straight away. Don't leave it until the last 12 months, because these guys will go away and they'll get more money somewhere else.
The logic would tell you that if they're good enough to get on the pitch in a meaningful game, which he did against Dundee, that was a meaningful game. Why is there then nothing after that? Why is there not a sign of intent by the club to, like you say, give him a deal and develop him further? But see, it's now subject to giving people minutes in pre-season, seeing as we are still technically in pre-season. I look back to see how often we'd had home friendlies at Celtic Park. You remember the old days, season tickets would get you, but as part of your season ticket, you would get a home friendly, and you'd maybe get the first qualifier in the Champions League. Yep,
and at Hampden, because we weren't in Europe, we got 2 friendlies, and it was Blackburn Rovers and Flamenco.
Right,
2 friendlies at home.
I might be wrong, but I've been looking back, and apart James Forrest's testimonial in pre-season last season was technically a friendly, obviously, but it was actually a testimonial, so that you'll remember that as a testimonial, not a pre-season friendly. We played West Ham and got scudded by them in the Ange Postecoglou pre-season.
Yeah.
But if you go back through the pre-seasons of the last sort of 10 years, there's barely been a pre-season friendly at Celtic Park. I might be wrong on that, but I did look into it because I was curious as to Celtic have done nothing to sort of make up for the fact that you've not had a pre-season friendly on your season ticket. It's just been accepted that there's not been one, so you don't get one.
It slowly becomes the norm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
you know what I love? You know what I love about the comment section on a Celtic State of Mind is if you do say something and you've not seen any news, the news will be brought up. So thank you to Scott Dougal. Young Turley has signed a new contract. I'm delighted with that. Tamboy confirms it as well, and also Baz. So thanks for keeping us right. Obviously, we're concentrating on what's happening pre-12:30. I am delighted that Turley signed that contract, and hopefully some of the other young guys who showed up well will sign a new one as well. We didn't even talk about music, JP. What are you up to this week? Just before you go, what are you doing? What's your jobs? Who are you working with?
Just working a gig at King Tut's tonight for the summer nights, and then again on Saturday. Going to the game on Sunday. Really looking forward to that. It feels like a long time since we were at Celtic Park, so I have missed it. I've not been pining for it every day, but I've missed it. So it'll be good to go back and see the team in the sunshine before the inevitable dark, cold nights come in a couple of months. Yeah, I think you always appreciate the sunshine games in August and September when you get to see Celtic play in the sun, and before it inevitably becomes bleak winter. But yeah, doing that, and then I guess next week I'm going to see Billy Joel in Cardiff, his only European date. So quite an eclectic summer of gigs. Stevie Nicks last week, Billy Joel next week. So really looking forward to that. He's one of my favourite singers, full stop. So I saw one of the E-Tims guys was at they didn't specify who, but they were at the last ever Madison Square Garden, his residency. So he did a monthly residency at Madison Square Garden over the last however many years. He's the guy that's played Madison Square Garden the most. Got a subway from upstate New York into Madison Square Garden to play the gigs. Like no fancy convoy or anything like that. He just gets in the subway to go and play his local, which happens to be a 20,000 capacity arena. But he finished his residency. I don't think he's not going to ever play it again, but the residency is finished. And it's sold out every single time, because if you think about the turnover of tourists in New York, there was just always people travelled specifically to go and see those shows. And I think he earned somewhere in the region of 1 and 2 million quid a show. So not bad work if you can get it.
Not bad if you can get it, JP.
He's playing what was the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff next Friday, and Chris Isaac is supporting him, which is pretty cool. So
that is cool. Aye. Was Chris Isaac the guy who had Helena Christensen on his music video? Is that him?
I think so, yeah. What was it? Wicked Game?
Yeah.
He had Wicked. His two big songs were Wicked Game and Blue Hotel.
Let's pull it right back to closer to home then. Helena Christensen was a massive Arab Strap fan.
She was.
Falkirk. That's crazy. That
I did ask Aidan about that on the podcast that I did with him, and it was true. She was a fan, and they met her once in Paris, and got to chat to her, which just blows my mind.
I'm sure there was a joint interview. Might be a false memory, and it was in one of the glosses. You remember mags, monthly mags for guys were a big thing. I'm sure it was GQ, maybe Esquire, and it was Helena Christensen and Aidan Moffat.
They actually interviewed them, didn't she?
Yeah, that's right. Aye,
I think that's right. Yeah,
brilliant. By the way, I make absolutely no apologies for talking about music. And by the way, Fud Roaster. I've got to read it out, guys. Music, Kneecap movie released tomorrow. I've seen the posters all over Glasgow. I'm going to tell you a wee story about Kneecap, right? So we've got a lot of content on the YouTube channel. If you've just subscribed or got into Acsom, go and check out some of the archive stuff. It's brilliant. And one of our previous contributors, good pal of ours called Colin Watt, he did an interview with, I'm going to call him Richard Lambert, I think. Check him out. He's the Bohemians chief operating officer. I'm going to check that his name is right. And at that time, Colin was talking away to him. And he said, what else are you up to? Because the Bohemians were doing a lot of Daniel Lambert is his name. Go and check it out on the YouTube channel. And he was asking him what else he was up to, because he was a cool guy, you know. He was getting like cool sponsors and supporting Palestine and all that kind of stuff for Bohemians back in the day. And I'm talking 5 years ago. And he says, you know, I'm managing a band, a young up-and-coming band in Ireland called Kneecap. So I remember Colin Watt came off the interview and he said, Paul, I used to have a whiteboard, you remember, on my wall, and all the new bands that came in, I would put it up on the whiteboard and try and get them in for a session. And had some great sessions with the likes of Brooke Combe and Rhiannon Downey and loads, Mark Sharp and all these guys. Kneecap was up on that whiteboard 5 years ago, JP, and they've kind of smashed it now, haven't they? So they're playing Glasgow.
Comfortably sell out the Barrowlands whenever they play. And Noel Gallagher's a fan now. Did you read him talking about them?
I did. What did he call them? A Republican hip hop band, I think.
Man, he got dragged to see them at Glastonbury, I think it was, and I think it had been described as to what they were like on the way to go and see them, and then he just walked in and there was like a tent full of people going absolutely bananas to their tunes, and he was in there. I think I saw a picture of him and one of the guys from the band as well. So
the one with the balaclava.
Yes.
Well, I would love to have the band. I'm putting this out there to Daniel Lambert. I'd love to have the band on This Is Acsom when they're over in Glasgow, JP. I'm going to see if I can get that done. I've emailed him because obviously he's been on the show before. He's still the manager of the band. Hopefully we can get that done. I'd love it. It'd be brilliant. A nice crossover because they're mad Celtic fans as well. Thanks everybody for getting involved. We were able to get a couple of minutes at the end on one of our most favourite subjects. Kevin Graham Pott is going to the Barras to see Kneecap. I hope you enjoy that. Is it November, isn't it? I think November they're over in Glasgow.
I think so.
Yeah, so we'll try and get them on the show. Thanks everybody for getting involved. This is Acsom on Friday night, episode 10. Subscribe to the channel, give us a big thumbs up, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you once again for JP Mason for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, Paul.